Poison Ivy, issue 39, G. Willow Wilson writing, with Marcio Takara on the art.
Yes.
This is a Matt book, so take it away.
Yep. All right, so catching up, in the last issue, Ivy and Janet from HR faced down the Bog Venus, who poisoned Janet with, essentially shutting off her immune system and letting this the fungal infection basically take over. And so in that issue, Ivy essentially pulls a double turn and kills the Bog Venus with this knife that she had, put this plant material on that would, disintegrate her, because Bog Venus fully believes that the green must be the primary force on Earth, and that Xylon, the guy in the gray, will only is only looking out for the fungus, and he'll completely destroy the Earth, because that's what it was like before the green had any power. And, that's why she was doing all this. So this is the fallout issue of that, to where now Pam and Janet have been gone. Peter Undin, who's the Fireface guy, is left with the Green Army, right? The Green Knights. And they don't know what to do because they need a leader. So they're all kind of standing around, and the police from Gotham are closing in. And Sprout, who's one of the main guys that has popped up there, asked Peter, like, what do we do? And he's like, I don't know, man. We'll head into the woods. Once we're into the woods, it'll be harder for them to find us. But I have an idea, and if I manage to pull this off, none of you will have to see me again. Because they try to make him the leader, because again, they're just looking for a leader, and he's not interested in that. And so he goes off. The main part of the story is Ivy and Janet reconnecting, and Ivy, through this meal that she feeds Janet, which Wilson never comes out and says it, but I'm pretty sure it's meant to be that she's feeding her Bog Venus, because it's all of these plant-based dishes. And there's a lot of dialogue or monologue from the narration from Pam, in that world's about balance, but it's not necessarily like both sides win. It's that nature likes a stalemate, right? Where you push against each other to the point where neither of you can push anymore. And that's what creates this homeostasis. And that, when it comes to treating a disease, sometimes the solution to that disease is a little bit of that disease introduced into a system, so you can build up, a resistance to it. And then that's how you get the balance. And so Janet comes in, and she's still all sick, and Pam has that knife that she had used on Bog Venus. And for a second, with all of the talk about balance and how nature, needs to do what's right, even though sometimes it's hard, right? That, in order for things to survive, some things must die. I was worried that Janet was going to be a goner, and that Pam was going to, be like, this is the end of it. It's gone too far. I have to do this for what's good. And that, no, she is, making this meal. And Janet gets confused because Pam goes, oh, it's time for dinner, right? I was making dinner. She's like, but it's morning. And, Pam's just acting super sketchy. But she brings out this tray. And as she's talking, there's a snake that keeps crawling onto the table. And it's almost like of this, of the betrayal, almost of like the snake in the Garden of Eden, right? And it keeps popping up in these panels. And she starts feeding Janet, and Janet's like, oh my God, this tastes so good. I don't know if it's because I've been sick and haven't been eating. But Ivy lets us know that no, she's released these pheromones, and that when you're under the influence of pheromones, everything tastes good. But it's important, that essentially Janet needs to take her medicine, and she needs to eat this food. And as the dinner goes on and they're eating, Janet starts getting better, like the discoloration from her eyes and her skin. And it is kind of funny. For the first time, I've noticed that her pale skin, her blonde hair, the red around her eyes, in this state, Janet looks a lot like Harley, right? And so as she's eating, she starts to look more like herself, and she starts to look healthy and not so much like Harley, at this point. And it gets to the point where now she is healed, and Ivy's almost shocked. And she says, I guess you start to take for granted that after a while, when you have all this power, you can still feel pain. And Ivy starts tearing up. And in her fully healthy status, Janet crawls across the table and embraces Ivy very passionately. And they end up doing the deed on the table. And Ivy fully gives in, even though like there's a piece of her that's like, I should not do this, and yeah, they go at it, and Takara does these, panels across the page that take these diagonals, and he adds that kind of psychedelic that we had gotten when Ivy was under the influence of the gray and whatnot. And they end up, when they're done, it says back in Marcio, not long after, there's this plant coming up through Janet's skin. And I this whole time I'm thinking, all this talk about balance, now we know that Janet's not dying. Is this the way that Xylon's going to have like an avatar, right? Is Janet going to become this balance of the green and the gray, and kind of like this stalemate of their power, right? Because she's ingested the Bog Venus now. She's been under the influence of this fungal, invasion, but this thing that's almost growing out of her hand is called a ghost pipe. And it's a balance of, a parasitic plant that can only grow in the presence of specific fungi. And as they're having this talk about, balance and homeostasis and whatever it is, there's a voice from off panel, and it goes, must have been one heck of a salad. And you turn the page and it's Harley. And that is what Undine's idea is Ivy has to go back in Gotham to pacify these police raids, essentially get Batman, right? To get to get them to stop going into the forest or whatever. And the one person that can bring Ivy back to Gotham is Harley. And it leads to an embarrassed Pam and Janet, and sitting there, and Ivy gives her the thing like, hey, if you don't come back with me, there's not going to be anything to come back to. And that's where it ends. So yeah, it feels like we're through the whole Bog Venus Xylon type stuff, and we're back to the weird love triangle that is Harley, Ivy, and Janet from HR. And Undine's feeling a bit like a left out, which I like him going to get Harley almost as a breaking case of emergency, because again, the only person that can touch him is Pam because of the toxins and whatnot. And just the fact that she left him there to go deal with the Janet stuff, he's almost feeling like a back to where he was at the beginning, like alone. And he finally realizes this. So Takara's art is fantastic throughout. The coloring here from him, it's that nice, almost watercolory kind of vibe. And then just the colors that we get where, the fact that Janet was starting to remind me so much of Harley, and then the fact that we bring Harley back through this really solid issue. I love where this book's gone. So so I'm gonna give this an 8.